Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Skillshare, and it contains spoilers for Shazam. You know, there's been a lot of talk over the last year or so about how Shazam fits into the larger DC universe. But one thing I haven't seen discussed nearly as much is the fact that this movie actually marks the return of the big screen's first superhero. Yeah, before the old Batman, Captain America, or even Superman serials, there was Captain Marvel. The young Billy Batson, who can transform into an incredible hero just by saying the word Shazam. And here's the thing, that old serial wasn't just the first, it was also kinda way better than almost all the others. Seriously, go back and compare the 40s Batman serial with that early Captain Marvel. One is made with so much more love and care for the character, whose comics at the time were even outselling Superman himself. The Captain Marvel character, now called Shazam due to decades of old legal wrangling, was a favorite of kids across America. But because he was owned by Fawcett Comics and not Marvel or DC, he kinda fell by the wayside. And that's too bad, because the character was absolutely one of the highlights of 1940s pulp entertainment. From those serials to the incredibly strange and imaginative comics that modern comic writers like Grant Morrison have cited as one of their main inspirations. In fact, Morrison talked about the character at length in his book Supergods, saying, "If Superman was science fiction and Batman was crime, Captain Marvel planted his flag in the wider territory of pure fantasy." But after so many years out of the spotlight, how could this new movie translate a very Depression-era children's fantasy to the audiences of today?
Prince of a single word.
I really enjoyed Shazam. It's not The Dark Knight, and it's not The Avengers, but it never tries to be. The movies that Shazam is really aspiring to be like are actually kind of older than that. More than anything, Shazam reminded me of an 80s kids movie. Stuff like Goonies, E.T., and obviously Big. Those movies have kids going on adventures, sure, but if they have one thing in common, it's that the worlds they take place in are pretty rough around the edges. Middle schoolers swear like actual middle schoolers do. They get into trouble and can be kind of genuinely nasty to each other sometimes. And all of that makes the cast feel less like stock Hollywood kid characters and more like actual people, even if the movie does take place in a really heightened and unrealistic world. I really think Shazam gets this right. Billy Batson is actually surprisingly selfish. His first impulse when he gets superpowers is to show off, get back at people who've wronged him, and buy beer. And I think that's the single smartest change from the source material that the movie makes. The Billy Batson in the movie isn't chosen because he's the most pure of heart or the most moral or anything like that. In fact, the wizard kinda makes it clear that Billy is chosen because, well, the old man's just kinda running out of time, and the 7 deadly sins already have their champion. Also, in the original comics, he was approached by a total stranger and then asked to head down into the train station, and Billy isn't even creeped out. He's like, "Sure, random guy, I'll follow you into an underground tunnel." Obviously, that's not really gonna fly with more cynical audiences today, so instead, Billy is chased into the tunnels after running from a fight. Both of these may seem like pretty minor changes, but I don't think they are. Instead of Billy being a 100% perfect kid, he's kind of a jerk, at least at first. And only over the course of the movie does he rise to the occasion of being a real hero. It makes the character a little less idealized and a little more grounded in reality, while still balancing that with the fantasy escapism of the original story. Oh, and speaking of the film having that kind of 80s kids movie style edge, let's talk about the bad guy.
Their friend Freddie Freeman, lovable Uncle Dudley, and that amazing talking tiger.
Shazam isn't the most complicated movie in the world, and considering just how much the marketing pushed the fun, trying to be a superhero scenes, above really anything else, I honestly expected nothing from the villain. But Mark Strunk's character really surprised me here. The director of Shazam, David Sanderberg, actually got his start making short horror films and how-to guides on YouTube, before directing Lights Out and the Annabelle prequel, and he really embraces his horror roots here. The 7 deadly sins are surprisingly creepy, and the movie doesn't hold back on that at all. Actually, in my screening, a family had to leave the theater because a poor kid burst into tears during the boardroom slaughter scene. And I might have actually done the same thing if I was 6, because these things have a very creepy Venom meets Lovecraft type design, which I really liked. More important though are the characters' motivations. I like them because they're actually sort of justified. The wizard that gives Billy his powers has basically teleported hundreds of kids and adults to his fantasy world, only to immediately tell them that they're unworthy and spit them back out, not at all caring about the effect that he was having on their lives. What I like about Dr. Savina is that he's basically Harry Potter gone old and bitter. He's a sensitive kid with round glasses and guardians who treat him horribly, and who, for a few short minutes at least, is shown a world of magic and wonder, and told that he could be the chosen one. But unlike Harry, that world is basically snapped shut right in his face, dumping him back out into a life that's about to get even harder for him. It makes perfect sense to me that this mistreated kid would grow up to spend his fortune hunting down that fantasy world. And it's hard to blame him for hating Billy either, who, after all, doesn't seem any more special than he was. He got the powers instead of Savina mostly because of timing and not much more. I think that adds some layers to what's otherwise a pretty light and breezy movie. Shazam has a lot of fun with the usual chosen one trope, but it also builds its villain around how cruel and arbitrary the idea of a chosen one is. And in its climax, it completely upends that cliche, which is actually a pretty good segue into what I want to talk about next.
Shazam, now featured on network television. Captain America fighting in...
If there's one thing that modern superhero movies, especially DC films, have shied away from, it's the old-fashioned Golden Age style extended superhero families. I guess Batman and Robin kinda put them off that idea for decades, so I was pretty surprised when the movie didn't just proudly feature the Shazam family, it built the entire third act around them. Partially taken from their New 52 incarnations, Billy's foster family plays a huge role in this movie. And while I wouldn't call them the deepest characters, it was still a nice surprise to see them become so important in the last act of the movie. If I have one big complaint about the film overall, it's one that a lot of these movies suffer from. The battle at the end just goes on for way too long. Still, the move to give everyone powers at the end was a pretty exciting one. It combines that 80s kids movie charm with the Golden Age superhero family in a really fun way. And it made me a lot more interested in what these characters could do going forward. But of course, what really sells this movie is two things: the search for Billy's mother, and the friendship between Billy Batson and his foster brother Freddy. The movie sells us on Billy and Freddy so well that seeing the superhero versions of them is really more of a fun bonus. Zachary Levi and Adam Brody are fun as the heroes, but it's actually the kid actors who have to do most of the emotional heavy lifting. A big highlight is the scene where Billy confronts his birth mother, and instead of delivering some huge dramatic twist, he basically just finds out that she was an overwhelmed teenager who couldn't raise him and doesn't have much interest in trying now. That actually really reminded me of the best of the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. It was a really sad human moment that feels earned, even among the more over-the-top superhero stuff. And a lot of that is thanks to Asher Angel's performance. Overall, I think Shazam re-establishes the character in pop culture in a way that stays true to the fantastical roots of the character, while also updating him for a more cynical modern audience. It's pretty tough to ride that line, and I think the movie did it a lot better than I expected. There's one scene where the characters open doors to different weird realities that really gets at the comic's strange dream logic, and I'd love to see DC dig into that more if this gets a sequel. So if you're watching this, I'm guessing you also have an opinion on Shazam, DC, and probably a ton of other things too, but maybe you're not quite sure how to make your voice heard. Now, I love YouTube, but I also listen to a ton of podcasts, which have really become a platform of their own. If you're looking to break into that world but have no idea how, I really recommend How to Make a Podcast, Plan, Record, and Launch with Success on Skillshare. It's a really thorough, easy-to-watch course on every aspect of podcasting from a podcast producing pro, and you can watch it right now for free. The first 500 people to click on the link in the description below will get 2 months of classes on pretty much any subject from photography to art to business and way more, absolutely free. It's a great way to learn new tools that can help unlock the creativity that you already have. So go to skl.sh/CaptainMidnight13 and get started. That's skl.sh/CaptainMidnight13.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes.